with apologies for having to project today. My lav mic's gone down and I don't have a replacement that has a windshield. Well, actually it's quite still today. I want to thank you for your responses to my vlog, which is linked above and below, about ghostwriting. It's created a fascinating debate, so much so I think I'm going to do a follow-up video about it, because I think it's raised some important points, and I think possibly me framing the world of ghostwriting within the context of Goodfellas was maybe not a good one, a kind of negative image. It actually is generally, if everyone respects each other, a kind of good way of breaking into the industry. But there is actually 1 degree to the left on the scheme, the spectrum of composeriness, that I can also give some advice on. Everything to the left thereafter I'm no good at, wouldn't take my advice on orchestrating or arranging, for example. So I thought I'd climb to the top of Crow Hill today with you, gather my thoughts about how to become a composer's assistant and what makes a good composer's assistant. So if you'll humour me on this walk, I'll get my thoughts together. Another one of you also asked whether that was the better route as opposed to going the more Olafur Arnalds route, you know, becoming a recording artist in your own right. See that hawk up there, hovering effortlessly in the air, rising above an air vortex and waiting for a little bunny to snag. There's a reason this hill is called Crow Hill and not Hawk Hill, and that is because it takes some serious chops to hang up in the air and then kill rabbits. It's relatively easy to be a legend in your own living room, but what Olaf has achieved, well, he's a hawk on Crow Hill. AAA media composers are wowed by successful recording artists, starstruck, because those guys and girls have achieved the impossible. What it takes to sit in your studio for months and months and months and hone sounds and music, melodies and harmonies that touch people the world over is nigh on asking the impossible. But then the work to promote and market that to the planet as a whole, to break through the deadwood and the chaff, the noise of just hundreds of thousands of people making music, to become a beacon on that kind of landscape of crap is so difficult. The promotional tours, the live tours, the meet and greets. You only need to look at Olafur's Instagram account and ask yourself, are you man, are you woman enough? So in answer to your question, media composition, blending into the background, being a little ghost, hiding from the limelight throughout your kind of formative years versus touring the world and being a rock star, which is the better route, which is the easier, welcome to the shadows, my friend. So I think I've established that the first thing to think about when becoming a composer's assistant is whether you're actually up for the task. So as I've said, you know, if you really feel becoming a recording artist is your future, by all means have a go. But I think you have to be honest with your own ability. There is a degree of utility to what we do as media composers, which is good news. It means that really you can be of, I don't know, this is hard to say without completely dissing my profession, but I believe there are more successful composers in applied music who are, say, maybe more mediocre in their talents than there are recording artists. This means that with a modicum of musicality and a lot of kind of ambition and hard work, you can, if you work really hard, you can get there. It isn't just about, you know, being some kind of unicorn style talent. Right, it's a bit windy up here. I've got coffee, so let's find a kind of stiller spot and we'll kind of work through this. If I may be so bold, I believe people who are starting out as composers' assistants, I've seen so many of them start with this kind of cocky, you know, I can do that, but they then learn very quickly, and it's always the same expression, it happens within days, that composition is about, I would say, at maximum, about 5% of what we do as our job, and always within 2 or 3 days of working as a composer's assistant, there's this kind of rabbit in the headlights stare of, oh my fucking god, I had no idea. To be fair, I think, you know, unless you're some kind of savant, As a composer, you're probably only at best halfway there. Maybe you've still got to work on your MIDI chops, learn about orchestration, that kind of stuff. So be mindful that when you're entering into the world of composition for media as a composer's assistant, that really you may at best only know 2% of what the job really entails. Maybe if you've been to university 3, maybe 4%, but I question how much they can prepare you. So that's the first thing. A willingness to learn is key. And as I've mentioned before, being humble's not the right word. There's a word and I can't think of it. But, you know, being able to blend into the background, keeping your trap shut at the right points, being diplomatic is another key point. So those are the kind of psychological criteria. Then we must talk about actual skills, because the composer is going to want you to dive in and help out as quickly as possible, won't want to train you from scratch. So I would say when I was breaking into it, it was all about this new art of technical preparation. You know, we were just coming out of the tape era, and it was all about, you know, what am I going to do with these 70 tracks of fake orchestral instruments? Well, we're going to lay them into Pro Tools. And at that point, no composers knew how to use Pro Tools. So it was absolutely paramount that you had to learn Pro Tools. This still remains to be the case. However, you're not going to get a job just because you know how to use Pro Tools, because all of those composers' assistants are now the composers and they know how to use Pro Tools. So what can you bring to the table that they may not have? Learning how to use Contact, as in sample into it, you know, trim, edit, create sample instruments, is a really cool additional talent that you can offer composers. The other thing is obviously being good at a digital audio workstation. I would say, you know, whilst it's handy to know Ableton, it's either Logic or Cubase. Cubase, if you're going into kind of Hans Zimmer's sphere of influence out in LA, is paramount. Cubase on PC. But I would say, just by doing straw polls at seminars that I attend, that Logic by far outnumbers. I'd say it's probably about 90% to 10% Cubase. Being able to orchestrate, being able to use Sibelius, being able to conduct, these are all kind of extras that you can bring to the table, and I envy you. You know, being an instrumentalist, being a really good guitarist, that kind of stuff can be absolutely fantastic for a composer. So how do you get the job as a composer's assistant? Well, it's quite simple, really. You just have to ask. And, you know, so many of my assistants were simply people who approached me and said, do you need an assistant? Oliver, who's the last assistant that I had before I dialed back my media composition work, he just approached me at a seminar and said, do you need an assistant? And the reason I said yes is for 2 reasons. One, because I could see he was enthusiastic. We work in these small, confined spaces with each other for many, many more hours than we spend with our families and our loved ones. So being agreeable is crucial. I don't know if I may have told him this, but the first time I used an orchestrator, you know, it's very difficult for me to work out the type of character I wanted to work with. If anyone knew anything about orchestration, that was one thing more than orchestration than I knew. So I met this chap, and he just had this bellicose laugh that completely took over his whole body, and it really appealed to me. It was like, well, one thing's for certain, you know, we'll get on and we'll have a laugh. That guy's name was Ben Valfish. His personality, as well as his, you know, amazing genius musical brain, has got him to where he's got to now. So, likability. Then when it comes to being a composer's assistant, I only have a few pointers, really, because for every job that I did, what I needed assistance on would differ. You know, one job, it was all about the technical preparation. Another job I did, it was all about the orchestration. Sometimes it was all about kind of creating interesting sample libraries. You know, there was a job I did where I wanted to play everything kind of live in my studio, so it was about, you know, putting up mics, all of that kind of stuff. So there's always going to be kind of different steers for composers' assistants. And I guess, you know, willingness to be varied in what you do, I think, is probably a good idea. You know, I've had assistants who weren't that into sampling, but I think that's a pity, because sampling for me is a really romantic, it's a very painstaking process, but the end results are so amazing. I have some assistants who were not so good at putting microphones up and getting the leads right, whereas some assistants, you know, came from Abbey Road and were awesome in that respect. If you're a likeable enough person, a composer will have the time to take you through and show you the ropes. Being a composer's assistant was a job that I did badly because I didn't know my place. Still in that kind of insufferable messianic glow that I was the chosen one. These people were just in my way. Normal clangers like not backing up drives, not being respectful to other people's equipment and breaking it. I did some track laying once where it was working through the night, and the only way we could kind of work out to stay awake was to make strong coffees, and then we decided to make strong Irish coffees. So we basically got rat-arsed, and whilst we did a good job, we didn't do a perfect job. So a composer was working up in London when he was mixing his score, had to return to Hampshire to pick up a harp part that we forgot to include. Using illicit sample content, my first job as an assistant, or rather as a drum programmer, just suddenly went, maybe that Motown track, maybe. So I had to pay for myself to replace it with a live drummer. But to err is to be human. And as I say, there will be calamities. The biggest mistake, I think, of all my mistakes is to not admit them. Really, the key thing with being a composer's assistant is establishing a bond of trust. I think the biggest harm I did to my career was by not knowing my place, demanding rights I didn't deserve, demanding credits I wasn't going to get, feeling that my contribution somehow was bigger than it was. I really do think it's a form of self-sabotage, and there's this psychoanalyst, I think, called Feuerbach. He came up with this idea of the inner saboteur. The best way of getting back at your parents is to fuck your own life up. So there's something in us in those kind of formative years. If we don't know our place, our subconscious kind of puts us back in our box for us by making us act in a way that is going to stifle our opportunities. And as a consequence, I think my career took a very different path from what it could have. I would say do everything with a real meticulous nature. You know, really double, triple check stuff. If you're listening to stems as you're printing them, don't play music or turn it down or mute it or dim it or natter over it. The whole point, the whole reason why the composer is relying on you is, you know, to spot those digital spikes, those little clicks, to check what you have track laid against what was in the demos, to check everything is in place, to check things are in sync. Double, triple check everything. Be meticulous in your approach. Your composer is relying on you to not be the kind of scrambled egghead that he or she will be at the tail end of a production. So being absolutely meticulous is great. Making a cuppa 4 or 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times a day, we can't get enough of this stuff. And it just is a way of bonding with the person you're working with, showing that you have empathy for what they're going for, and maybe they need a nice cup of tea. Or saying, listen, why don't you have a lie down? I think I can see what you're up to. Do you want me to program some ostinatos to fit in between the top line and the bass line? I don't know if this is much help, actually. I don't know if there's much more I can say, really. Back up. And back up the backup, and if the composer hasn't backed up, tell him or her they need to back up. I guess my final point, really, is meek. That's the word I was looking for, being meek. I guess my final thing is, you know, there will be times where, you know, think of it like working in a kitchen, and hopefully you're not working for Gordon Ramsay, you're working for someone like Angela Hartnett, but there will be times where frustrations will froth over, boil over rather, and you may get shouted at, or some work that you've done will be abandoned. For God's sake, don't send your composer to Coventry. Don't make them walk on eggshells. You know, I think rise above it, breathe in, let the emotion of what you're experiencing drain away. Enjoy what it is to be a great assistant. You know, being a great assistant is not being the best orchestrator or the best track layer or being the best programmer. It's being the best assistant. And I think just being the best at a job is a great thing to aim for and to achieve. You know, to be able to say, you know, I've got amazing MIDI chops and I helped him out and I put some of my MIDI chops on his music, but I was a fucking shit assistant, is to have failed on the job you have been asked to do. So just empathise with the composer, be meek, be enthusiastic, be willing to learn because they want to teach. If you make a mistake, work out why you made that mistake and how you're not going to make it again. Be more thorough than the composer ever can be. Their example to you is how, you know, you can really deliver the minimum viable product with the time they have. You're not about delivering minimum viable products. You use the time that you have to be as meticulous, as thorough as you possibly can. And, you know, if you do end up working for an arsehole, see that as a wonderful opportunity. Believe you me, whilst there are a few composers who are arseholes, there are directors who are complete tit heads. Anyway, I hope this has been of assistance. As I said before, I'm going to return to the question of ghostwriting because it seems to be thorny, and I love a thorny issue. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. The comments down below, if you're new to this vlog, are where it's really at. This is me just like kicking off conversation. So I would love to hear your comments below about your experiences as a composer's assistant and how it helped you kind of achieve that maid status that I talked about in my previous video. If you haven't hit the bell yet, that'll notify you the next time I put up a video. And if you like what I do, I'd really appreciate a thumbs up. See you next time. Yes.